Making a sequel for a hit movie is always tricky because you can rarely tell whether it'll be as good or bad as the original movie, and they're always compared to the original. Now, with the success of Top Gun: Maverick this year and its obvious stark contrast to its predecessor, we've come up with a list of the top sequels with the biggest gaps in quality from the original movies. Let's get right into it. First up, Hannibal Rising. The first on this list of sequels with the biggest difference in quality from their predecessors is none other than Hannibal Rising. The original movie, The Silence of the Lambs, won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. On the other hand, the 2007 prequel, Hannibal Rising, was so bad that it got 16% on Rotten Tomatoes. The main thing that the movie got wrong was what could have made it all the more interesting. Hannibal Lecter is arguably the most iconic villain in pop culture and the most famous cannibal in movie history. So having a movie that dives into his backstory could have been really cool. Unfortunately, it only bored die-hard fans of Dr. Lecter to tears, or made them mad. Not to mention, Anthony Hopkins didn't even reprise his role as the iconic villain, even though he still returned for the sequels Hannibal and even the critically slammed Red Dragon. Something was lacking in the movie's script, and while Hannibal is only bad compared to the original Silence of the Lambs, still, it's not anywhere close to the same level. Next up, Logan.
The world is not the same as it was.
Most X-Men fans scoff whenever the movie X-Men Originals Wolverine is brought up. Interestingly, it's a near unanimous opinion that the movie was the worst in the trilogy of Wolverine movies, and it's for a good reason too. The film was filled to the brim with inaccuracies compared to the source material and had pretty laughable CGI and a poorly written script. Not to mention, they full-on butchered a fan-favorite character. After that, Wolverine came out, but it was pretty unmemorable overall. At that point, fans had pretty much given up on getting a good movie for their favorite character, but then Logan came, and it changed the whole game. A masterpiece from start to finish, Logan did everything the preceding movies couldn't and wouldn't. It gave fans exactly what they wanted in a Wolverine movie and more. Coming up, the Jurassic World series.
I'm really proud of you for going on this trip.
You're gonna have so
A while ago, the famous Jurassic Park movies that started in 1993 got a reboot makeover with the Jurassic World trilogy. But the trilogy's final film aired this year in June, bringing an end to the franchise for now. And in most fans' opinions, thank God. While some people point out that the Jurassic World series is probably the worst to date, and yes, Dominion was pretty bad, honestly, pointing out these movies as the worst sequels for the franchise is pretty unfair. Jurassic Park has been on a downward spiral ever since the first sequel, Jurassic Park: The Lost World. Jurassic Park 3 featured Dr. Alan Grant talking to a velociraptor. And yeah, sure, it was a dream sequence, but you can't deny that it was an all-time low for the franchise. Following up, Transformers: Age of Extinction.
All the way!
Okay, to be honest, picking the worst Transformers sequel is like trying to pick the worst case of food poisoning you've ever had. They're all awful, just in varying degrees. Still, Transformers: Age of Extinction was on a whole other level of bad. From Mark Wahlberg being cast as an amateur inventor and single father from Texas, to all the weird subplots like the introduction to the state's Romeo and Juliet laws, which protect older males who date underage women, this film was a train wreck from the start. It's pretty ridiculous that one of the major themes of the movie was personal freedom and all the consequences of unchecked consumerism. But at the same time, we see an entire beer truck destroyed in the movie, just so they can have the camera linger over all the spilled Bud Light bottles, and then even have Wahlberg pick one up and chug it down in one go. It's hypocrisy at its finest, to say the least. Anyways, the story begins in the remains of an old cinema palace, as if the Age of Extinction referred to in the title literally relates to the extinction of movie theaters. Honestly, if that ends up being true, we wouldn't be too surprised that a movie like this is part of the reason why. Moving on, Mortal Kombat: Annihilation. This might be the pair on the list with the least gap compared to all the others here. But the thing is that, sure, 1995's Mortal Kombat isn't exactly the Citizen Kane of video game movies, and it was pretty corny too, but Mortal Kombat: Annihilation was hands down, seriously, that bad. It's even worse knowing that this movie is known for having one of the worst line deliveries ever, of one of the worst lines written in history, ever. We all know the line when Sindel exclaims, "Too bad, you will die." Honestly, now that Mortal Kombat 2, the sequel 2021 reboot, is currently in the works, it would be hilarious if there was some throwback to that iconic Annihilation line. Now for Anchorman 2, the legend continues.
The great ones always return.
Anchorman 2 is guilty of something that's unfortunately becoming a really popular trend in Hollywood lately: requels. Whenever a movie does well, the chances of getting a sequel are usually pretty high, but nowadays they're usually the same movie, just with a small change in the plot or with a different character, which most people dub requels now. One movie that doesn't even try to hide that they're a blatant remake of the first movie is Anchorman 2: The Legend Continues. And the first one was indeed pretty dumb and funny, but it was in all right ways. Anchorman 2 is just plain dumb. It tries to retell the original movie story on a bigger scale. The best example of this is when all of the news anchors from different stations start fighting. This was hilarious in the original 2004 film, but when they tried to remake this scene in the original, just more epic, it just didn't work at all. Honestly, the funniest part of Anchorman 2 was pretty much its bloopers, which is pretty sad for a comedy movie. Up next is The Suicide Squad.
Robert Dubois.
Okay, we've listed a lot of really bad sequels, so let's go back to sharing a few really good ones. A perfect example is The Suicide Squad, which greatly differs from its predecessor, Suicide Squad. Comparing the two, the biggest difference is that the first movie was just messy and just an overall confusing waste of a movie. On the other hand, the sequel is arguably one of the best comic book adaptations to date. Not to mention, The Suicide Squad introduced the world to Peacemaker, which should be enough of an argument that it is way better than the original. One thing's pretty funny though, we're still not fully sure if the 2021 movie is a sequel, reboot, standalone movie, or something else. But still, there's no denying that The Suicide Squad was better than Suicide Squad, no matter what kind of follow-up it is. Moving on, It, Chapter 2. It's that movie about the terrifying clown and is undoubtedly one of the best horror movies ever to date. After all the positive reviews the first movie got, it didn't take long for the second, It, Chapter 2, to come out. Unfortunately, it wasn't anywhere near as good, and while the sequel still got good reviews, most people agreed it was way goofier and less scary than its predecessor. Two things no horror movie ever wants to be. Still, as disappointing as Chapter 2 turned out to be, fans still want to see It, Chapter 3. Finally, Top Gun: Maverick.
What do we have here?
When people talk about Top Gun, they usually say it was just an okay movie, and with a 58% score on Rotten Tomatoes, that's not surprising. But Top Gun: Maverick turned things completely around for the franchise. Not only does it have a well-deserved 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, but it also stayed in the box office top 10 for a long time after it was released, a feat that not many non-superhero movies can achieve nowadays. With a staggering box office gross of over $1.4 billion, it's pretty safe to say that Maverick is the biggest success story of 2022. Of course, the success of sequels doesn't begin and end with their box office numbers, but there's no denying the huge gap in quality between the two movies. Compared to the original, Top Gun: Maverick is a real masterpiece. And that's a wrap for this video. Are there any other sequels that you think should be in this list? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this, and we'll see you at the next one.